My family secretly took the $300,000 my grandma gave me and tried to erase me from her 82nd birthday, until the truth came out in front of everyone and the relatives who betrayed me realized they had chosen the worst possible moment to lie. This involves family theft, lies that would make politicians blush, manipulative relatives who redefine the word entitled, and the kind of slow-burn revenge that writes itself better than any Hollywood screenplay. I am 31, male, single, and I run a custom motorcycle shop in Phoenix, Arizona. Not exactly living the high life, but I genuinely love what I do. There's something magical about taking a rusty, broken-down hunk of metal and transforming it into a roaring piece of mechanical art that purrs like a tiger and looks like it belongs in a museum. It's my passion, and my paycheck rolled into one beautiful, grease-stained package. For most of my 20s, I was your typical working-class guy, grinding it out wherever I could find steady work. I bounced between gigs as a mechanic at various auto shops, delivery driver for everything from pizza to medical supplies, warehouse worker loading trucks at dawn, construction helper when the weather was good. Basically, whatever kept the lights on and food in the fridge. Never rich by any stretch of the imagination. But I had a philosophy that served me well. Work harder than everyone else, save every penny you can squeeze out of your paycheck, keep your expenses lower than your income, and never rely on anyone else to make your dreams happen. Now about my family. This is where things get complicated and frankly pretty ugly. My mom, Linda, has always had this bizarre complex where she genuinely believes the world owes her something special. Picture that person who constantly complains about their problems, but never actually takes any concrete steps to fix them. Who thinks opportunities should just fall into their lap because they deserve better, and who somehow always manages to be the victim in every story they tell. That's her to a T. She spent most of my adult life bouncing between part-time jobs that were supposedly beneath her, always talking about how she was meant for bigger and better things. My dad, Carl, is basically her enabler, all rolled into one spineless package. Whatever Linda wants, Carl immediately agrees to, even when it's completely insane, financially devastating, or morally questionable. I've watched him nod along to her wildest schemes for years, never once standing up to say, maybe this isn't such a great idea. He's got this weird martyr complex, where he acts like sacrificing his own judgment for the sake of keeping peace with mom makes him some kind of saint. Then there's my older brother, Jason. Oh boy, where do I even start with this walking disaster? He's 33 years old, has never held a steady job for more than 6 months in his entire adult life, and somehow convinced everyone in the family, especially mom, that he's destined for entrepreneurial greatness. This is the kind of person who has elaborate business ideas that he'll talk your ear off about for hours but has never actually run a successful business, maintained a budget, or demonstrated any practical understanding of how money works in the real world. Jason lives in this perpetual fantasy where his next big scheme is guaranteed to make him rich and famous while everyone else should fund his lifestyle and cover his expenses until that magical day arrives. He's bounced between multi-level marketing scams, day trading with money he didn't have, trying to become a social media influencer in markets that were already oversaturated, and always looking for the next sure thing that would require minimal effort but maximum reward. The guy is basically a walking, talking advertisement for why lottery tickets are a tax on people who can't do math. But here's the thing that made this whole situation so much more painful. There was always one person in my family who actually got me and believed in what I was trying to accomplish. My grandmother, Evelyn. This woman is 82 years old and tougher than a $2 steak that's been left out in the Arizona sun for a week. She's got more grit, determination, and practical wisdom in her pinky finger than the rest of my family combined. After my grandfather passed away when I was 7 years old, Grandma Evelyn raised 3 kids completely on her own during an era when single mothers got a lot less support than they do today. Not only did she manage to keep the family together, but she built and successfully ran a small trucking business for 30 years before retiring. We're talking real old-school work ethic here, up before dawn, working until after dark, never taking shortcuts, and always treating people fairly, even when they didn't return the favor. Grandma was the only person in my family who ever truly believed in me and my ability to make something of myself. When I was struggling to figure out my place in the world, bouncing between dead-end jobs, and feeling like I was never going to amount to anything, she'd sit me down and say, "Ryan, you've got good hands, a good heart, and a good head on your shoulders. Keep working, keep saving, keep learning, and the right opportunities will come along when you're ready for them." She was absolutely right. But unfortunately, work kept me so busy that I couldn't visit her as much as I wanted to. Phoenix to Dallas isn't exactly a quick weekend trip, and taking time off meant losing money I couldn't afford to lose. Last summer, right around the beginning of July, Grandma called me with an invitation that made my whole week. She was planning her 82nd birthday party for the following weekend and wanted me to come to Dallas to celebrate with the whole family. I was absolutely thrilled because I'd just finished the biggest, most challenging, and most lucrative project of my career up to that point. A tech executive from Scottsdale had hired me to build him a completely custom Harley-Davidson from the ground up. We're talking a bike that nobody else in the world had. Custom frame geometry, hand-fabricated, fuel tank. One-of-a-kind paint job that took 3 weeks just to design. Performance modifications that pushed the engine to its absolute limits, while still being street legal. The guy had very specific ideas about what he wanted, an unlimited budget, and the patience to let me take the time to do everything perfectly. When I finally finished that bike and fired it up for the first time, it was like listening to mechanical poetry. The client was so happy with the result that he paid me a bonus on top of our agreed price and immediately started telling his wealthy friends about my work. For the first time in months, I could actually take a weekend off without worrying about missing rent money or falling behind on my business loan payments. I started planning the trip immediately. I even went out and bought Grandma something really special, this absolutely gorgeous leather jacket made from genuine cowhide with custom stitching work done by a guy who specializes in high-end motorcycle gear. It wasn't cheap, probably cost me more than I should have spent, but she'd always admired the leather jackets I wore when I worked on bikes. And I wanted to get her something that would make her feel as tough and cool as she actually was, but then exactly 2 days before I was supposed to fly out to Dallas, my mom called me with news that immediately felt wrong on multiple levels. Her voice sounded strange, not upset or worried like you'd expect if someone was genuinely sick, but kind of flat and rehearsed, like she was reading from a script someone else had written for her. She said, "Ryan, I've got some disappointing news about this weekend. Grandma's decided to cancel the birthday party. There's apparently some kind of bug going around her neighborhood, and you know how careful older folks have to be about getting sick. She's really sorry about the short notice, but she doesn't want to risk anyone's health." Now, on the surface, this should have made perfect sense to me. We'd all learned to be extra cautious about illness around elderly relatives, and Grandma had always been practical about health and safety issues. But something about the way Mom delivered this information felt off. The tone was wrong, the timing was suspicious, and she seemed almost relieved to be telling me the party was canceled. But here's what really triggered my suspicion radar. About 3 hours later, I got a text message from my dad with the exact same information. Not similar information, not a paraphrase, but word-for-word identical phrasing. Then that evening, Jason sent me a text with the same message, character for character. 3 separate family members, all independently deciding to contact me, all using identical language to cancel the same event. My gut was telling me something was seriously wrong with this picture, but I couldn't figure out what possible reason they'd have for lying to me about a birthday party. I figured maybe they just coordinated their messages to make sure I definitely got the news and understood it was serious. Weird way to handle it, but families do weird things sometimes, especially when they're trying to be considerate. Here's the thing though, I'd already booked my flight and requested time off from my own work schedule. The airline ticket was completely non-refundable, and honestly, I was really looking forward to seeing Grandma, even if we couldn't have the big celebration. I thought maybe I'd just show up quietly, give her the leather jacket, sit on her front porch, and have one of those wonderful meandering conversations we used to have when I was a kid. Sometimes the best visits are the completely unplanned, spontaneous ones where you're not trying to entertain a crowd or stick to a schedule. I landed at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport around 3 p.m. On that Saturday, picked up my rental car without any problems, and started the drive to Grandma's neighborhood. She lives in this quiet, tree-lined area just outside the city limits. Older homes with big front yards, sidewalks where people actually walk their dogs. The kind of place where neighbors know each other's names and keep an eye on each other's houses when someone goes out of town. As I'm driving down her street, I started noticing something that didn't match the story I'd been told. Cars. Lots and lots of cars parked along both sides of the road, filling up driveways, some even parked on the grass where there wasn't enough curb space. This wasn't just a few neighbors having friends over. This was the kind of parking situation you see during major events. Then I started hearing it, the unmistakable sounds of a large gathering in full swing. Laughter, music, multiple conversations happening at once, the clinking of glasses, someone telling an animated story that was making a whole group of people crack up. My first thought was that maybe one of the neighbors was throwing their own big party, possibly even in honor of Grandma's birthday since hers had been canceled. But as I got closer to Grandma's house, I realized all the noise was coming from her backyard. The party that had supposedly been canceled due to health concerns was clearly happening without me. I parked across the street and just sat in the rental car for a few minutes trying to process what I was seeing and hearing. Walking up to the front door felt completely surreal, like I was moving through some kind of alternate reality. I could hear conversations, people laughing at jokes, someone giving what sounded like a toast, the general buzz of a really successful party. I knocked on the door, and when it opened, the person who answered, one of my younger cousins, went absolutely white as a sheet when they saw me standing there. I stepped inside and experienced something I'd only seen in movies before. You know that classic scene where the record player scratches to a halt and everyone in the room stops, talking at exactly the same moment? That actually happened to me. The entire room full of people, extended family members I hadn't seen in years, friends, neighbors, probably 30 people total, all turned to stare at me in complete dead silence. My mom was across the room near the kitchen chatting animatedly with someone about something that had been making them both laugh. When she spotted me standing in the doorway, her face went through about 5 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, panic, forced joy, something that might have been guilt, and finally this weird, strange smile that looked like she was trying not to throw up. She rushed across the room, gave me this super tight, almost desperate hug, which was extremely unusual because we've never been a physically affectionate family, and whispered urgently in my ear, "Don't make a scene, Ryan, please." Grandma changed her mind about the party at the last minute. "We tried to call you, but your phone must have been off during the flight." Jason was standing near the food table with a paper plate loaded with potato salad and barbecue. When our eyes met across the room, he immediately looked away and suddenly became very interested in examining the contents of his plate. My dad was doing that thing he always does when he's uncomfortable, pretending to be extremely busy with some trivial task. In this case, he was obsessively rearranging chairs that were already perfectly positioned. But then I saw Grandma, and everything else in the room just faded into the background. She was sitting in her favorite armchair near the window, wearing this beautiful blue dress that brought out her eyes. And the moment she spotted me standing there, her entire face absolutely lit up with pure joy. She threw her arms open wide and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ryan, you made it after all. Come here right now and give your old grandmother the biggest hug you've got." I walked over and hugged her, and she felt so small and fragile in my arms, but her grip was still surprisingly strong. When I pulled out the leather jacket and showed it to her, her eyes actually got misty with emotion. She made me help her put it on right there in front of everyone, and she said, "This is the most beautiful, most thoughtful thing anyone has ever given me in my entire life. I'm going to wear this jacket for the rest of the night, and probably for the rest of the week." That moment of genuine connection and appreciation made all the weird family drama and confusion completely worth it. Throughout dinner, I could feel my parents watching me like I was some kind of unexploded bomb that might go off at any second. Every time I opened my mouth to speak, Mom would visibly tense up. Every time I asked a question or made a comment, Dad would shoot nervous glances in Mom's direction. I kept my mouth shut, enjoyed spending time with Grandma, and tried to figure out what everyone was so obviously terrified I might say or do. After we finished dessert, Grandma's famous chocolate cake that she'd been making for family gatherings since before I was born, she started doing her usual post-meal routine. She'd go around the room chatting with each person individually, asking about their jobs, their relationships, their plans, their problems. She genuinely cared about everyone's answers and remembered details from conversations they'd had months earlier. Grandma was talking to my cousin Sarah about how college was going, asking specific questions about classes Sarah had mentioned during Christmas. Then she moved on to my uncle, wanting to hear all about his new job managing a hardware store. She asked my aunt about her garden, remembered which vegetables had done well last year, and wanted to know what she was planning to plant differently this season. Then she got to Jason, and I heard her ask, "So Jason, tell me what you ended up deciding to do with your money. Have you been happy with the choices you made?" Jason got this incredibly smug, self-satisfied expression on his face and puffed out his chest like a peacock showing off. "I invested it. Grandma made some really smart moves in the market, already seeing some solid returns on my investment. It was definitely the right call." I'm sitting there thinking, what money is he talking about? Jason had never had more than a few $100s to his name at any given time throughout his entire adult life. His financial situation was a running family joke, always broke, always borrowing money, always coming up with elaborate explanations for why he couldn't pay people back. But I figured maybe he'd finally gotten his act together, saved up some money, and made a decent investment decision. Good for him if he had. Then Grandma turned to me with this expectant, loving smile and said, "Ryan, I'm so curious to hear what you decided to do with the $300,000 I gave you. Have you been able to put it to good use?" The entire world stopped moving. I mean that literally. Time seemed to freeze completely. $300,000. I thought for sure I'd misheard her. Maybe she'd said 3,000 or 30,000 or some number that would make sense in the context of my actual life. But no, she had clearly and distinctly said $300,000. My brain was trying to process this information and failing completely, like a computer trying to run software it wasn't designed to handle. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, my mom grabbed my hand under the table with a grip so tight that my knuckles actually popped. She immediately jumped into the conversation and said, "Oh, Ryan hasn't made any decisions about that yet. He's being very careful and thoughtful, taking his time to consider all his options before making any major moves." But Grandma has never been the type of person you can easily deflect or distract when she wants to hear from someone specific. Her eyes sharpened with the kind of focus that had made her successful in business for 30 years. And she looked directly at me with an expression that brooked no interference. "I'm asking Ryan, Linda, not you." I pulled my hand free from Mom's painful death grip and said, "Grandma, I'm really confused. What $300,000? I've never received any money from you. I think there might be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding here." The silence that followed my words was so complete and profound that I could literally hear the air conditioning unit cycling on in another room. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Every single person at the table was staring at either me or my parents, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Grandma's expression went through a series of changes: confusion, concern, dawning realization, and finally something that looked like cold, controlled anger. It wasn't pretty. Grandma slowly turned her attention to my dad, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, but there was steel underneath every word. "Carl, I think you'd better explain to me where Ryan's money is right now." My dad started stammering like a teenager who'd been caught sneaking in past curfew with his clothes on backwards. "Well, you see, Mom, there was this situation that came up, and we thought, we were planning to. It's not what it looks like. My mom decided this was the perfect time to deploy the waterworks." Suddenly she was crying, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, talking through fake sobs about how they were just trying to protect my money and make sure it was being handled responsibly. Jason had apparently decided that the ceiling was the most fascinating architectural feature he'd ever encountered and was refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the room. Grandma let them flounder around with their non-explanations for about 30 seconds, then turned to my uncle and said in a voice that could have cut glass, "Call the police now." That's when my parents dropped to their knees. Literally fell to their knees right there in front of everyone like they were auditioning for some kind of dramatic soap opera. My dad said, "We didn't steal anything. We would never steal from family. We just borrowed the money temporarily for an investment opportunity that was going to benefit everyone." Once that dam burst, the whole sordid story came pouring out like water from a broken pipe. Last Christmas, Grandma had made a major financial decision that none of us grandchildren had known about. She had sold a significant portion of her old trucking yard property to a commercial development company and had decided to use the proceeds to help out her grandchildren while she was still alive, to see them benefit from her generosity. She had given each of her grandchildren $300,000, a life-changing amount of money that could pay off student loans, serve as a down payment on a house, start a business, or provide financial security for years to come. It was an incredibly generous, thoughtful gift from someone who had worked hard her entire life and wanted to share the fruits of that labor with the people she loved most. I had been out of state that week in December, working a last-minute emergency job for a client whose custom bike had broken down right before a major motorcycle rally. It was the kind of opportunity I couldn't turn down: great money, good exposure for my business, and a chance to help out someone who was in a real bind. So I'd missed the family gathering where Grandma had distributed the money to everyone else. Rather than make me wait or complicate the process, Grandma had asked my parents to provide her with my banking information so she could wire me the money directly. This seemed like a perfectly reasonable solution that would get me my gift without any unnecessary delays or complications. Here's where the story gets really ugly and reveals just how deep the betrayal actually went. Years earlier, when I was younger and significantly more trusting, my mom had come to me with some kind of temporary financial emergency. I don't even remember what the supposed crisis was. Probably something about wanting to buy something they couldn't afford and needing to avoid the embarrassment of being turned down for a loan. Being a good son who wanted to help his mother, I'd opened a joint bank account that would allow her to deposit and withdraw money as needed to handle whatever emergency had supposedly arisen. She was supposed to remove herself from the account once her crisis passed, but apparently she never did. For years, she'd maintained access to an account that I'd completely forgotten about. So, when Grandma asked for my banking information, my parents provided her with the details for this old joint account that Mom still had complete access to. Grandma, trusting her son and daughter-in-law to act in my best interests, wired $300,000 to that account on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, every single penny of that money had been transferred to some kind of investment account that Jason had set up for his latest get-rich-quick scheme. This wasn't just any run-of-the-mill bad investment either. Jason had somehow convinced my parents that cryptocurrency mining was going to make them all millionaires practically overnight. He'd found some company, I never did get the exact name, and it probably doesn't matter since it was obviously a scam from the beginning, that promised massive returns if you invested in their mining operation. Classic too-good-to-be-true situation that would have been obvious to anyone with even basic financial literacy. But my parents fell for it completely. They saw dollar signs, imagined themselves getting rich without actually working for it, and decided to gamble away my entire inheritance on Jason's latest fantasy. By the time I found out about any of this, 3 months later at Grandma's birthday party, my $300,000 had been reduced to approximately $25,000. The cryptocurrency company had disappeared with most of their investors' money, leaving behind nothing but a dead website and a lot of people who felt incredibly stupid. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in how to handle family betrayal with surgical precision and absolute moral clarity. Grandma didn't yell, didn't scream, didn't have an emotional breakdown. She just got very quiet, very focused, and very determined to make sure justice was served. She politely but firmly asked all the party guests to leave, explaining that a serious family matter had come to light that needed immediate attention. People filed out quietly, many of them shooting concerned looks back at my parents who were still kneeling on the floor, looking like their world had just collapsed. Then Grandma, my uncle, and I drove to the local police station to file a report. At the station, Grandma laid out the entire situation with the precision and organizational skills of someone who had successfully run a business for 3 decades. She had all the documentation, copies of the wire transfer, bank statements showing where the money had gone, email correspondence with the investment company, everything organized in a neat folder that she'd apparently put together as soon as she started getting suspicious about the whole situation. The police officer taking our report kept shaking his head and muttering things like, "Family members stealing from each other is always the worst kind of case." And, "People never learn that if an investment sounds too good to be true, it probably is." My parents and Jason were brought in for questioning separately. The whole thing was technically legal because of that old joint account paperwork I'd signed years earlier. But morally and ethically, there was absolutely no question that they had stolen from me. They had taken money that was intended for me, used it for their own purposes without my knowledge or consent, and then actively lied to prevent me from discovering what they had done. While we were still at the police station, Grandma had her lawyer meet us there, right there in the lobby with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of bad coffee filling the air. She had him start drafting changes to her will. My parents and Jason, who had been expecting to inherit her house, her remaining savings, and various family heirlooms when she eventually passed away, were being completely cut out of the will. Their portion of the inheritance was being redistributed to me and my uncle's family, people who had proven they could be trusted with money and family relationships. But here's the part that really showed Grandma's wisdom and sense of justice. She didn't just want to punish them, she wanted to give them a chance to make things right and prove they could change their behavior. She gave them an ultimatum that was both fair and non-negotiable. They had exactly 30 days to pay me back the full $300,000, plus interest calculated at the same rate her money market account had been earning. If they managed to pay everything back within that time frame, she would consider not pressing criminal charges and might even consider adding them back to the will after a probationary period. If they failed to pay me back in full, she would pursue every legal option available to her, and they would remain permanently cut out of any inheritance. You want to know how people's true character comes out when they're under real pressure? The entire ride home from the police station, my mom spent trying to negotiate terms like we were buying a used car, instead of dealing with the consequences of theft. What if we pay back half now and half over the next 6 months? What if Jason works for Ryan for free until the debt is paid off? What if we sell some of our stuff and give Ryan whatever we can get for it? What if we all just agree to forget this happened and move forward as a family? Grandma shut down every single suggestion with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a small child. You took $300,000 that didn't belong to you. You lied to Ryan and to me for months. You were willing to let your own son think that his grandmother had forgotten about him or didn't care enough to include him in her gift to the family. There is no negotiating here. There is no partial payment plan. There is no forgiveness without full restitution. The next 30 days were absolutely fascinating to watch from a safe distance. My parents had to completely dismantle the lifestyle they'd been living and liquidate everything they owned of any value. First to go was their overpriced suburban house, the one they'd bought at the height of the real estate market because Mom deserved to live somewhere that reflected her imagined status in life. They'd stretched their budget to the breaking point to afford the mortgage payments, and now they discovered that they owed more on the house than it was actually worth in the current market. Jason had to sell his truck, his motorcycle, his expensive gaming computer setup, his collection of power tools that he'd bought for projects he never actually started, even his furniture. Watching him post increasingly desperate ads on social media trying to sell his possessions was like watching someone's entire identity being dismantled piece by piece. But even liquidating everything they owned wasn't nearly enough. They were still about $80,000 short of what they owed me, and time was running out. That's when they had to start making the kind of financial decisions they'd been avoiding their entire adult lives. They took out personal loans with terrible interest rates because their credit scores were mediocre at best. My dad had to swallow his pride and take on a second job driving for a delivery service, working nights and weekends on top of his regular day job. My mom, who hadn't held steady employment in over a decade, had to take a cashier position at a grocery store and work retail hours for retail wages. Jason started delivering pizzas while still trying to maintain the fiction that he was some kind of business expert who was just temporarily down on his luck. He kept posting on social media about his various projects and opportunities, but nobody was buying it anymore. Word gets around in communities, especially when someone has publicly failed as spectacularly as Jason had. On day 29 of their 30-day deadline, looking like they'd aged 5 years in a single month, they managed to scrape together exactly $320,000. The original $300,000 plus the interest that had accumulated in Grandma's money market account. I'll never forget the moment they brought me that cashier's check. They looked absolutely defeated, like people who had finally been forced to confront the reality that actions have consequences. Jason couldn't even make eye contact with me. My dad kept apologizing over and over for letting things get so out of hand. And my mom actually tried one last time to make the whole situation about how I should be grateful they'd worked so hard to fix their mistake. I deposited that check at my bank and felt something I'd never experienced before in my life. The deep, profound satisfaction that comes from seeing justice actually served and wrongs actually made right. With $320,000 sitting in my checking account, I could finally pursue the dream I'd been working toward for years, but never had the capital to make happen. I found the perfect location for a much bigger, much better motorcycle shop, twice the square footage of my old place, with room for multiple bikes, proper ventilation systems, hydraulic lifts, and even a small showroom area where customers could see examples of my work. Meanwhile, my parents and Jason were discovering what life looked like when you actually had to face the consequences of your poor decisions. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental house in a significantly rougher part of town, the kind of place with thin walls, unreliable plumbing, sketchy neighbors who played loud music at all hours, and a landlord who considered basic maintenance requests to be personal inconveniences. Jason's grand vision of himself as a cryptocurrency entrepreneur had been replaced by the reality of delivering pizzas for minimum wage plus tips. He complained constantly about having to deal with difficult customers, about how the job was beneath his skill level, about how he was just doing it temporarily while he worked on his next big opportunity. But potential investors weren't exactly lining up to fund the business ideas of someone who had so publicly and spectacularly failed with other people's money. My mom's grocery store job was apparently a daily assault on her dignity. She complained to anyone who would listen about having to deal with rude customers, about being on her feet for 8 hours straight, about how unfair it was that someone of her intelligence and capabilities was stuck scanning barcodes and bagging groceries. The irony that she was finally experiencing the kind of work that millions of people do every day without complaint seemed to be lost on her entirely. My dad picked up that second job driving a delivery truck for a logistics company, working nights and weekends on top of his regular day job. He looked perpetually exhausted, and I heard through other family members that he'd started falling asleep during family dinners and social gatherings. But here's what really got to me about their situation. They were still making loan payments on the money they'd borrowed to pay me back. Those high-interest personal loans that had seemed like such a good idea when they were desperate to meet Grandma's deadline were now a monthly reminder of their poor financial decisions. They were paying hundreds of dollars every month just in interest charges, and it was going to take them years to pay off the principal. The whole family dynamic had shifted completely. At family gatherings, my parents were no longer the ones giving advice or making plans. They were the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you make selfish, short-sighted decisions and expect other people to bail you out of the consequences. About 6 months after the whole money situation had been resolved, I was in my expanded shop working on a restoration project, a 1969 Triumph Bonneville that someone had found in a barn after 30 years, when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed it was my mom, which was unusual because we hadn't spoken since the day they'd paid me back. When I answered, she was crying, not the fake, manipulative crying from the birthday party confrontation, but real sobs that sounded like they came from genuine distress and exhaustion. "Ryan," she said between sniffles, "I don't know what we're going to do anymore. Everything is falling apart. The landlord just told us he's raising our rent by $400 a month starting next month, and we simply cannot afford it. We're already stretched to our absolute limit, just making ends meet." I listened to this whole sob story about how my dad was working himself to death but still not earning enough to cover their basic expenses. How Jason was struggling to find better employment because his reputation in the community had been damaged. How she was so physically and emotionally exhausted from her retail job that she could barely function when she got home at night. Then came the punchline that I should have seen coming from a mile away. "You're doing so well now with your business and everything. The shop looks amazing. You're obviously making good money and you've got your life completely together. I think it's time you started giving back to your family. We need you to help us with this rent increase so we don't end up homeless." I actually laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the request was almost admirable in its complete lack of self-awareness. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, still chuckling. "You stole $300,000 from me, lied to my face about it for months, tried to cover it up by lying about Grandma's birthday party, and only paid me back when you were threatened with criminal prosecution. And now you want me to give you money because you're having financial difficulties." "We didn't steal it, Ryan. We borrowed it for what we thought was a good investment opportunity that would benefit the whole family. A family investment that I knew nothing about, didn't consent to, and received no benefit from. Well, if you had been more involved with the family and more available for discussions, maybe we could have talked to you about it beforehand. Mom, you literally lied to me to keep me away from Grandma's birthday party because you were terrified I would find out what you had done with my money." She went quiet for a minute, probably trying to come up with another angle to make this somehow my fault. Then she said, "Look, Ryan, I know we made mistakes, but family is supposed to help family when times get tough. We made things right with you. We paid back every penny with interest. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us and help us out now that you're in a position to do so? Family doesn't steal from each other, Mom. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't try to manipulate and guilt each other into enabling their poor decisions. You taught me exactly what kind of family you are. Now you have to live with the consequences of that lesson." And I hung up on her.